So as we look at this image of the tree, we see that the trunk is the sturdy, the important part of the tree, the strength of the tree, and that is the functions. So as we look at how we can build the competence of our learners, it's about increasing the number of functions that they can do. So what are functions? Well, there are a variety of them that we can do at all proficiency levels, and they will be done with increased degrees of competence as they gain in the text type and they gain in the ability to express themselves in extended discourse. So as we're assessing them, it is important to make sure that our assessments and our instruction are also both driven by the functions. So looking at what we're designing for our daily formative assessments and for our summative assessments, we really want to be focused on the functions first. The assessment is really for the student to be able to understand where to next. So it is really important that this language is shared with the students, so that the students have a sense of how well the learner is meeting the goals. How are we making teaching and testing all part of the same process? How can the students set goals to move up the proficiency scale? When the students understand the world readiness standards, when the students understand the proficiency levels, they are equipped with the language needed to be able to set goals for assessment in order to continue their growth. That is part of giving them the roadmap of helping them to understand where to next. One of the ways that we can empower students is by giving them the can-do statements. I would encourage you to give those statements to students so that students can start to have ownership of their learning and ownership of the functions that they would like to be able to have as a language learner. Any good instruction is going to work with the backward design model and be able to give us a real chance to focus on what are our desired end results. Then we're going to stop and look at what is the acceptable evidence to show that the learners have met those results. And then we're going to plan the learning experiences in the instruction. This is really the backbone of the IPA, of the Integrated Performance Assessment. So we're going to start by looking at our results. Then we're going to be moving on to evidence. How do you know? And then we're going to be planning the learning experiences. So where do we get these resources? Well, the goals are in the standards and in the learning targets. The evidence would be found in the can-do statements or in assessments. And the learning experiences and instruction are our learning activities and our language elements. We are starting with our world readiness standards. The next step is to make sure that we are understanding the ACTFL proficiency guidelines. That is what the students need to understand as well as the teachers, so that we can be sure that they know where they're going to next with their assessment. As we're looking at these proficiency levels, we're looking at ways that we can show that novice learners have evidence that they have mastered the task that we are going to give to them. So here's an example, a list of things that novice learners can do. Intermediate learners can now create with language and ask and answer simple questions on familiar topics. Your intermediate learners compared to your advanced learners, you can see on this slide here what the differences are in terms of what we're asking the student to be able to do. What are you going to do if you're going to start building an IPA? Well, you're going to start with the end goals in mind, as we talked about with the backward planning. So we're going to start with the culture, the motivation. How are we going to hook these students? As online learners, you have many students in your classes who are really committed to being able to use the language for interpersonal communication, to be able to travel, to be able to explore. So how can we hook them with culture in order to motivate our learners? Then you're going to take time to identify the summative performance assessment. So how will we know if they have reached the success? Well, this is going to be the starting point of your plan. And then, working backwards, you'll create meaningful tasks, practice activities to help the learners get there. And finally, you will determine what tools are needed for success. What are those language elements? What are the functions? What are the grammatical structures? What is the priority vocabulary? And then in what content? This is a sample template. How do my family, friends, and where I live influence my free time activities? How am I going to know if the students have arrived? What are the summative performance tasks that I would like to have in all three modes? What are the can-do statements that are related to those summative performance tasks? And then, as you can see at the bottom part, what are the supporting functions, the structures or grammar that you would need, and also the priority vocabulary. So you're going to start first with your essential question. That is the leading with the culture, hooking the learners with the engaging essential question and theme. Obviously be that the language will follow. We're going to give them opportunities in all three modes to grow their language in order to support the essential question and theme of the culture. So as you can see here, you're going to start with a blank summative performance task, and then start to identify in all three modes what it is that you would like to have the students do to answer the question, how do my family, friends, and where I live influence my free time activities? As you can see here, these are samples from Laura Terrell's website, the wiki spaces that I had mentioned, and you can see that there are different tasks for each of the three modes. These do not have to be completed on the same day. They can be done at different times, and I do have some rubrics to further support what J.D. Brown was sharing with you last week in order to assess and give feedback on how the students are doing in all three modes. So as you can see here, the next thing that you will do is look for key learning activities, formative assessments that you will do in order to support the task. So these will be done in all three modes of communication. They may allow for, as you can see, some of them have interpretive, interpersonal, and presentational modes of communication. And that is something that you can do as you're moving in and out, blending the activities from the three modes. The next thing that you're going to do is stop and look at the tools that you're going to be needing for success. So I'm currently in the middle of an IPA about where do young people around the world sleep. So they have been comparing homes and rooms of teenagers. And so you can see here that I have supporting functions is describing homes, comparing and contrasting. We're also looking at the tiny house movement. And then, so what does that mean for the supporting structures or the patterns? And then obviously, what is the priority vocabulary when they're talking about housing and what young people have in their rooms around the world. So that will be the last part that I'm going to address, not the first part. So again, it is a complete paradigm switch for those of us who were trained in earlier decades. So as you can see here, I'm going back to sharing with you the example from Laura Terrell. You can see that she's listed functions of asking and responding to questions, expressing likes and dislikes. Again, the functions are driving the instruction because that is the measure of a language learner. The toolbox then moves on to the related structures and patterns that will be needed, and you can see on the right is a priority vocabulary. There are a variety of sample units that you can use to base your ideas, and there are lists of essential questions that you can get yourself grounded in interesting essential questions to help hook these learners and help them to become engaged in their learning. The main thing that we really need to make sure that we're clear on is setting the performance and the proficiency target. Until teachers and students have a clear understanding of the proficiency levels, it is very difficult to set a target. So the reason that I started with the World Readiness Standards and then the proficiency levels was to draw attention to the fact that you cannot set a target until you have a really clear sense of what each of the proficiency levels does, and then also even better understanding of the sub levels. So I think if there's one way that I've really been able to help my students internalize that language, it has been through the can-do statements. I have found that to be a really helpful tool and a way for them to help set goals so that they can see, oh, this is what an intermediate mid looks like. I've got my eyes on intermediate high, and this is what I need to do in order to get there. Then the next thing is to identify what students will need to be successful. So stopping to think about what are those functions, what are the structures, the patterns, and the vocabulary that are going to make them have success within this unit. And then finally, to be specific in setting the unit goals, to describe those overarching performance goals so that the students will know what they're going to do, and they will be able to get feedback specifically on the functions that they are that they're mastering. So if I were looking for resources for you, I would certainly suggest exploring OFLA's. It's the Ohio Foreign Language Association's website. They have an IPA Tech Live Binder. This is sort of by theme, by modes, technology tools, and I find them to be very rich in resources, both for online and for face-to-face. Okay, so the last part that we wanted to look at here was how to design effective online learning experiences and assessments in each of the modes. So in this portion of the webinar, I would love to give some ideas about how to support each of the modes with regards to formative assessments. The first mode is interpersonal, and I think we really need to stop and spend a little bit of extra time on interpersonal when it comes to the online learning environment. There are some real affordances that the technology does allow for. So as I look at these real world contexts for interpersonal, it's the small talk, getting to know someone, making plans, making a purchase, ordering in a restaurant, making an appointment, texting, interviewing someone, completing a transaction. As you look at these contexts, I think that many of your online learners are very much driven to be able to do these activities, and as part of the reason why they're taking time to do their courses online, maybe in addition to a job that they're already doing, in order to be able to do this for business or work or their career. So as we look at this list, some of these things are much easier in a face-to-face class. However, there are plenty of them that are easily done through technology. So let's take a look here. One thing that I think helps the interpersonal mode is using graphic organizers. If you go to the Carla website, you will find an abundance of graphic organizers. This is just a screenshot of the top 5 graphic organizers available, but there are many graphic organizers. And in order to go back to this real world context, in order to do some of these things, it does help if they're using a graphic organizer to start organizing their thoughts before entering into the interpersonal activity. So it is basically the preparation for a conversation that that can actually help them to get through some of those tasks. So I would encourage using graphic organizers for some of your interpersonal activities. I also do a lot of YouTube clips. I upload them to Google Classroom. I will upload them with a Google Doc, having the students do a prompt about something that they learned in the interpretive mode. So here's one where they're looking at different places to visit and then why. So whatever the video clip is, it's easy to put the students into partners and then have them discuss where are the destinations that you would like to visit, or after viewing this video, what was your learning? What is your opinion going into a persuasive piece or what have you? So here are some of the ways that I use it. I do have completed graphic organizers, and then I have them upload and share them with me to show me what their learning is as they're getting the main ideas, as they're listening to the recordings. I may also say, for another interpersonal activity, submit a voice recording of a partner conversation. I do this sometimes in class, and so the class ones, it's pretty easy with a voice memo, but online, it could be through Skype, it could be through Google Hangouts, where they record a conversation and then they can submit that. Or they could do a paired video conversation. So depending on what my goal is for collecting the evidence, there are lots of ways that I can allow the students to have that interpersonal experience in a way that is meaningful, but it's also in a way that I can get them to change their partners, which is of utmost importance when you're in the online community, because it helps reduce the isolation that students feel. There are lots of samples here to show you a variety of interpersonal tasks. As you can see, they're sorted by novice, intermediate, high to advanced. And so you can see the functions are clearly described, and the ability to which they are using those functions will continue to grow as they move up. But again, getting back to knowing our proficiency levels, we can't craft these activities until we have the ability to set the proficiency targets in a way that is accurate for the student. I have probably about 10 different interpersonal scoring guides that I just photocopy and I leave on my table. So I'm constantly giving them feedback on how to move up the proficiency scale. Here is one that was developed by Donna Clementi and Paul Sandrock. Here is another one that was also developed by Donna Clementi and Paul Sandrock. Again, I use these as I'm grading. I just got a whole series of interpersonal conversations that were sent to my inbox. And so I'll have this scoring guide and I'll go through and say, well, actually, I can say always for staying in the target language, staying on task always, but maybe there was no evidence of encouraging each other, or maybe there's no evidence of solving a problem. This allows me to give the students feedback, and having a variety of scoring guides and rubrics is very helpful to me, but it's also helpful to the students to be able to see where they need to improve their performance. Moving on to presentational mode, we want to go back to that real world context again. As you can see from this list, there are lots of opportunities here that would really lend themselves to the online classroom. So the question is, how do we do this in a way that is engaging, based on authentic resources, and allows for students to elaborate and to be able to move to the next sub-level of proficiency. So here are some examples of presentational tasks. You can see on the left is the function to persuade, to explain or inform, to narrate. And here's what it looks like at the novice level, the intermediate level, and the advanced level. And I included these so that you would have a variety of tasks to lean back on. As you can see, there are plenty that really reflect the online classroom in a way that is meaningful for your students. Looking at the interpretive task, the question with the interpretive task is to look at the authentic sources. That is, I would say, a real strength in the online classroom, because that is where we're going to get most of our authentic resources. So finding those resources is really key to the student engagement. And then we stop and ask ourselves, what is essential to demonstrate about understanding? What is the prompt? And how will you elicit what the learners understand? So focusing on good questioning after interpretive tasks is really a key component here. It's not only about the questioning, it's also about choosing a graphic organizer or some sort of organizer that helps the student take notes or capture what they have learned. There are a variety of ways that you could do this through authentic texts. And I would say one of the ways that I use frequently would be posting to Twitter, having the students come up with a message to distill what their essential learning is, having them read an article and then just write a post back to the person who has posted the article in the target language saying why they enjoyed the article, what were the main ideas that they took away from the article. So there are lots of ways to leverage those authentic texts and have the students then move from interpretive reading or interpretive listening into presentational writing. When we look at the real world context for interpretive, there are so many ways that it is actually easier to leverage the interpretive through the online courses than it is in the face-to-face classes. The interpretive mode is a time where students can listen to it multiple times or view it or multiple times, and that does help reduce the anxiety that students have when they're hearing it for the first time in the classroom. So that is an advantage that the online students do have. So after the reading, going back to some of these graphic organizers, this is another one from Carla, thinking about what you want to have them capture to show that they are making progress towards that goal. Predicting. So when you're looking at predicting, take any sort of possible content, put that on the left. Either it's in the article or it's not in the article. That's another way to capture what they have done. And then when you're looking at guiding the interpretive performance, I use a lot of the documents from, and I've adapted them from Common Core State Standards for ELA. So I have built close reading guides to help students look for the main idea and then look for the details that support each of the main ideas. Look for textual evidence to be able to understand the article. Share documents. That's a great way to get students to comment on each other's understanding. So for example, if you have a jigsaw document that you share with the classes, when the students read the article, they can each put their ideas about what they learned, or they could read 3 different articles on the same topic, and then they each share the main ideas from the document. And so the peers are able to support one another by adding to that. Graphic organizers is something that I keep coming back to because I think that they're varying the graphic organizers and the uses of them is a really important way to get students to keep making meaning. And then finally, digital gallery walks. So the gallery walk that we would do at a conference or in a classroom where the students physically move about the room adding to a poster paper, you can do the same thing for a digital gallery walk and allow students to make comments on different aspects of the learning.